Hello, welcome to this YouTube webinar on dyslexia and self-esteem at second level. My name is Wyn McCormick. There are 9 YouTube webinars in the series, and I recommend to everyone, be they parents or teachers, that they would look at the webinar on how dyslexia affects the student at second level first. It gives an understanding of the various challenges that can face the student. Then they can look at whatever others are of interest to them. This particular webinar is relevant to both teachers and parents. As always, any of the links given during the webinar will be below on the YouTube page. Some students with dyslexia may have low self-esteem. It is not dyslexia, but it is connected to it and may result from the experience over many years. Luckily, not all students with dyslexia will have low self-esteem. Where it is there, it can be very deep-seated. It may have begun years back when they were 6 or 7 and they were struggling to achieve something that everybody else in class could easily achieve. It can affect motivation and concentration and behaviour and be a cause of anxiety. I always feel when I'm talking about dyslexia and looking at reading, writing and spelling, etc., I can identify strategies to help easily. For self-esteem, it's more embedded and tackling it is more complicated. Just to give you some Irish voices talking about dyslexia and how it affected them, particularly in relation to self-esteem and behaviour, I'm directing you to the YouTube video Left from Right. The link is given. In it, you hear Irish voices talking about their own experiences. It's over 40 minutes long, so I've directed you to particular moments inside it. I've always found the 2 little girls talking at about 22 minutes in very moving. Some young people and children may have faced considerable difficulties from a very early age. They were in classes where the majority were learning to read and write with comparative ease, and they were struggling. Being identified late adds to the burden. Teachers may recognise their abilities and then accuse them of being lazy or lacking in motivation when they cannot do tasks. They can feel stupid, alone, frustrated. And as the demands increase as they go through the school systems, their difficulties may increase. If they have severe difficulties, it is more likely that they will be identified early. Also, students can get very tired. It is such hard work. They can protect themselves by making self-derogatory statements. I'm no good at maths, and therefore I don't need to try. They can become defensive. I'm sure teachers will recognise the student who puts their arms around the work so nobody can see it. They learn not to volunteer. Why set themselves up for more failure? They get frustrated easily and have little faith in their own judgment. At one side of the continuum, you have the student who gives up easily. But on the other extreme, I've met students who know they should be able to compete with their peers and want to. So what happens is they become perfectionists and they work over and beyond what one would expect. When I have met first year students who are doing 4 hours of homework a night at the end of a tiring school day, that is far too much. I've also met some students who have spent their whole 5th year summer rewriting their notes for going into 6th year. Other ways low self-esteem may affect them are that they are unwilling to make mistakes in front of others and so do not try. They avoid contributing to discussions in case they are made fun of. It can lead them to becoming more isolated and alone. In some adults, it might also lead them to being reluctant to apply for promotions because they fear the stress of the interview, where they might need time to understand the questions and more time to retrieve answers. They can panic. It's not just that there's a right and a wrong answer. There's just lots of wrong answers, and it's a matter of chance whether they hit on the right one. And inconsistencies can make it a roller coaster. It's unpredictable. If someone is recovering from a broken arm, the path to recovery is smooth. With dyslexia, if one is stressed or one is tired, dyslexia may be more pronounced at that stage. Richard Hogan, who is a psychotherapist and the author of Home is Where the Start Is, he is frequently on Brendan O'Connor on a Saturday morning and also writes in the Examiner. He writes about his dyslexia. As I write this, there is a little voice that says, don't tell them about the dyslexia, they'll think you're stupid. That's the problem with something as insidious as dyslexia. It makes you guarded, like you've something terrible to hide. The sheer isolation and embarrassment a student may feel because they cannot learn at the same pace as everybody else. It is a corrosive thing when it's not challenged. It impacts massively on a student's sense of self. It can have an effect on concentration, motivation and behaviour. Concentration can be affected by processing. The teacher may think that they are talking to everybody in the class at the same speed. But for students who have to listen and decode what is being said, they may have to concentrate much more, and the class may appear to be going at a really fast pace, and this can be very tiring. The words and the instructions may pass over their head. If a teacher gives a long list of instructions, they get lost. Then motivation may be affected. This is such hard work with such little reward. They have to work harder than others and yet not achieve. And there can be the baggage from years of failure at primary school. It also can affect behaviour. If the system makes it that they cannot learn, it is better to divert attention from these difficulties. They might prefer to be the class clown than to be the person who cannot do something. They may look for escape by being put out of class, or for a small number it might go as far as school refusal. Here are a few examples of how a loss of confidence or low self-esteem can affect a student. I was preparing these webinars and I went to get my hair done. The stylist is a very competent lady with an 11-year-old son. Deirdre is not her name. We had spoken about dyslexia before, but on this occasion she spoke about the experiences she had when she was at school, where she had migraines and stomach pains very often, which she now puts down to the stress of being dyslexic. In particular, she spoke of one teacher who wrote in a report, "Deirdre just does the minimum to get by." As she talked, I could still see the hurt those words caused in her younger self. It was still so raw for her, and this is many years later. She wondered firstly about the teacher who could write such a comment, and then about school management who could let such dismissive words be used in reports. I felt I had to include it because it was so relevant to this webinar on self-esteem. The next example is a lad I'm calling Declan, again not his real name. His parents became really concerned about his lack of any study in second year and asked me to give him advice on how to go about it. I got him to do the DATS so that I would have some baseline information on him. The DATS is an aptitude test that students take, usually in transition year. It tests them in 8 different areas and is a help in career guidance and choosing subjects for the senior cycle. The results of students with dyslexia often show a very wide scatter of scores, and this was the case with Declan. He had great strengths in areas like numeric, abstract, mechanical reasoning, and much weaker scores in the verbal areas of spelling and grammar. The gaps were so pronounced that I recommended assessment, and this was put in train. In the meantime, I started to talk to him about study and realised it was not going to be productive. His head was not in that space at the time. He was identified as being dyslexic in the assessment, and this and the results of the DATS began to restore his confidence and his belief that he could manage. By the time he went into senior cycle, he was a different student and well able to face the challenges it brought. The WISC-5 is often the cognitive test used in a psychoeducational assessment. This slide just shows the 5 major sections in it and the subtests. Here are the WISC results for a girl whose name is not Maria that I met several years ago. She had had some additional teaching at primary because she had reading difficulties. She came into secondary and again she was getting additional teaching support. She was very ambitious and she wanted to achieve academically like her friends. By the end of second year, however, she was very down. Her parents decided to get an assessment, and the WISC results are shown in percentile scores here. With percentile scores, 50 is the average score, so anything above 50 is above average, and she had 3 areas way above average, but 2 of her scores were very low. This explained her reading difficulties. Understanding this profile of ability, that she had strengths but there were weaknesses, helped her. The strategy for her would be to use her strengths to help her overcome her weaker areas. From this point on, I'll be making some suggestions about things that might help with self-esteem. There is no quick solution. It is very deep-rooted and it can be years in the making from those early years of primary where they feel lost. There will be some students who've had some bad experiences and are deeply affected by them. Some form of help or counselling might help them to prepare to engage in school. Here is a piece written by Bernadette McLean, I give the link, in a Sen magazine, and it explains one key support for the child with low self-esteem. She stresses the key role of an adult who understands. A panel of highly successful adults with dyslexia were all asked the same 2 questions. What helped you the least in your education and what helped the most? Their answers were unanimous. What helped them the least was being placed in a remedial group, being treated like a slow learner, and had been given more of the same sort of teaching that had not worked in the classroom. This compounded their feelings of failure. What had helped the most were not expensive solutions, either professionally or technologically, but simply being believed in long enough by another person that they began to believe in themselves. This is something any secondary school teacher is capable of doing. If you esteem these pupils, they learn to esteem themselves. What Bernadette McLean said in the previous slide is echoed in this quote from Maya Angelou. At the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did. They will remember how you made them feel. There is some debate about labelling. I think there are pros and cons for both the child and the parent. The child may feel a sense of relief when identified. It makes sense of the difficulties they've been experiencing. They may have felt stupid or thick because they couldn't do what other people could do. It may show strengths in the profile, which is reassuring, but it can also make them feel different. I know some teenagers who did not want to use assistive technology or get extra help because they did not want to be different. For parents, it helps them understand the child's difficulties, why they were finding school so hard. It opens the path to resources and additional help. It can help them explain the child to teachers. It gives weight to what they are saying if there is an assessment. However, it may make them worry about the future. I give the link to Glaser's findings from his study on the impact of dyslexia on pupil self-esteem. He found that having ownership of the dyslexic label, support from the family, friends and teachers, and a clear understanding of one's dyslexia is key to promoting positive self-esteem in dyslexia. I would agree with Glaser. The benefits outweigh the disadvantages of the label. Parents often say that not knowing and not understanding why the child is having difficulties is far worse than knowing that the difficulty is dyslexia. Neurodiversity is a concept gaining ground since the 90s and is becoming well established now. I see it as very positive development in promoting the understanding of people with ASD, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia. It says that people experience and interact with the world in different ways. There's no one right way of thinking, learning and behaviour. Maybe in the past, education was geared to one particular way of learning and behaviour. Differences are differences, they're not deficits. Different people think differently because their brains are wired differently. Here are two links. One is to an RTE article on neurodiversity if you would like to read up something about it. And secondly, there is a link to the British Dyslexia Association webinar on neurodiversity for teachers. The concept of the dyslexia-friendly school will also contribute to the development of positive self-esteem. Niall MacKay, in his article in Dyslexia Successful Inclusion in the Secondary School, says, dyslexia-friendly policies enable schools become more effective and improves the performance of all pupils. This is the power of the dyslexia-friendly approach, that changes made on behalf of dyslexic students benefit everyone. MacKay develops his ideas of dyslexia-friendly strategies in his book, Removing Dyslexia as a Barrier to Achievement. People may have learning differences, but it is when they're not catered for that they become learning difficulties. Happy, secure learners learn, anxious learners do not. The key support is to remove stress and minimise fear. If students are not stressed and anxious, it'll help with self-esteem. The British Dyslexia Association Good Practice Guide on Dyslexia-Friendly Schools says virtually the same thing as MacKay. Dyslexia-friendly teaching techniques will be helpful to all students, while students with dyslexia may not be able to learn effectively without them. The best practice is to teach all students as if they're dyslexic. In the same book, they say, avoid copying from the board, reciting times tables, reading aloud and undifferentiated spelling tests. All of the above draw attention to the dyslexic pupil's difficulties. Many dyslexic adults would claim that if these 4 activities had been avoided, they would have been much happier and much more confident in school. I love this page from Teach Thought on 50 ways to encourage a child. I included it because I would have loved to have access to it and these suggestions when I was teaching and marking work in the evenings. Here are some suggestions about possible interventions. The teacher that they can talk to about the dyslexia. This could be the special education teacher or a teacher that they relate to well. My earlier slide with a quotation from Bernadette McLean makes the point of how important teachers are in helping develop self-esteem. Then All teachers and coaches should know the profile of ability of the students with dyslexia they have in their class. If they have 4 students with dyslexia in the class, the profile could be quite different for each one, and what works for one may not work for the other. Sometimes sports coaches are overlooked. They also need to know the profile of students with dyslexia, otherwise they might assume reading and writing skills exist that aren't there, and it might lead to embarrassment for the student if they can't do something the coach asks. Next, the student needs to know about dyslexia and to have positive examples of people with dyslexia who have succeeded. On this page, I'm showing the names of some famous people who have dyslexia. It's from the Dyslexia Association's Dyslexia Information Hub. Again, some well-known people who had some difficulty with school. William Butler Yeats, it was said, was sent to lessons in spelling and grammar but never learned to spell. And Churchill was, on the whole, considerably discouraged by my school days. It wasn't pleasant to feel oneself so outclassed and left behind. And then with Einstein, he was reported to be mentally slow and unsociable and adrift. I think videos about dyslexia are helpful. The videos can be used to explain dyslexia to the students and also helps them feel that they are not alone. Here are 4. The first one, Fat City, how difficult can this be? Is one that I use a lot. It puts teachers and parents and psychologists into the situation where they experience difficulties similar to those of a child with dyslexia. It helps viewers walk in the steps of some of those with dyslexia in the classroom. It is very old, and you'll see it from the clothes and the hair, and the term learning disabled is used, which would not be used today. When I'm giving in-service to school staff, I try to include a few minutes of it. The second video, Left from Right, is Irish-based and has different people talking about their own experiences, including Brendan O'Carroll, Mrs. Brown. See Dyslexia Differently is a British Dyslexia Association video, and in just 3 minutes it explains the difficulties students may have and then gives very positive examples of some of the famous people with dyslexia who have helped change our world. The last is A Letter to His Dyslexia by Vernon Francois. He had a very rough time when young, but succeeded in setting up a chain of hair salons. He writes a letter to his younger self and says that dyslexia made him the person he is now. I ran a study skills workshop for students in senior cycle for many years, and I had a video in which I would show them that 20% of UK entrepreneurs and 30% of US had dyslexia. In fact, I give the link to a Forbes article which puts it as high as 40%. And the video asked, why is this the case? And it suggested 2 reasons. One was that people with dyslexia were problem solvers and thought laterally. They had to be, since they were facing many difficulties and hurdles. And the second reason was that they had to work harder than others because they faced such challenges. And in doing so, they developed grit, determination and perseverance that paid off. Continuing with this slide on possible strategies, I would say the student needs to understand their profile of ability and then develop on strategies that would work for them. I also think that as part of wellness or pastoral care, all students could be made aware of the various learning difficulties that exist. In some schools I've been to, older pupils with dyslexia are happy to help out younger pupils and talk to them about their experience and how they coped. Positive correction, of course, helps with self-esteem. Everybody knows about the 3 stars and 1 wish. If the teacher should make 3 good comments and then mention the 1 change they would like, so the student can feel good about the corrections. The second suggestion here comes from MacKay in the book Removing Dyslexia as a Barrier to Achievement. He uses the technique of success, think and tip. Here, first of all, the successes are noted. The student is then asked to think about maybe putting a paragraph in, and then some tips are given. And the student who gets back this piece of work will be quite happy to learn from the corrections made. When correcting a student face-to-face, check they understand what is being said. Remember, some student with processing difficulties will take longer to understand what teachers are saying. And when it is in a situation of discipline, anxiety can add to this. Don't insist they look at you. They can get the message without looking at you, and this is particularly true if they're neurodivergent. For some students in this situation of anxiety and embarrassment, the expressions on their face may not reflect what they are actually feeling. Some other ideas: build in small successes and with achievable and adapted goals, and then they can see the improvements happening and gain confidence. Remember that they may need more time and repetition to become automatic when doing tasks. One idea I've had in the past was to bring vulnerable students into school a day early at the beginning of first year. This was helpful in the case where there were multiple feeder schools and the students didn't know each other. On this day we had fun and games, but we also showed the layout of the school, the names of the key teachers, and they got to know some other students in a small group. It meant the next day they were much more confident when interacting with the whole group. If reasonable accommodation makes a difference to these students, it should be in place from first year. For some students with neurodivergence, a timeout facility where they can go if the school gets too overwhelming can help. They could take some time out and then return to class. And of course, parents have a key role with self-esteem. They can influence the students to take part in sports and drama and other activities. Admittedly, this is truer for the younger teenager. And then, when students are struggling in school, study skills can prove to be an effective help. As I said in my introduction to the first in the series of these talks, I've written and updated the fact sheets on dyslexia and have circulated them to schools annually. There are 18 fact sheets. Fact sheet 17 is for students. Many of the ideas in it come from the study skills workshop which I did for many years with senior cycle students, where we looked at their difficulties and looked at strategies that would work for them. I give the link to the fact sheets here. They are on the Dyslexia Association of Ireland's website. Here I just mentioned some of the strategies the students appreciated. When students who find it hard to do something, like get information into long-term memory, find something that works for them, they hold on to it for dear life. It becomes a life skill. It cuts through the confusion and saves time. So I've mentioned ideas here that are covered in Fact Sheet 17. Also, the Dyslexia Association of Ireland have all their webinars up on YouTube, and there are 6 study skills webinars there under link 15. They're coming up in a slide in a moment. Here's a book called Taking the Hell Out of Homework by MacKay, and it could also help with study skills. It's a rich source of ideas and strategies to help students complete work more easily and with less stress. It is a book for parents and carers who are desperate to help their children but who don't know exactly how to do it. Simple strategies and tricks of the trade are presented, and it's applicable from ages 6 to 16. Here are just some more ideas. Praise for genuine achievement. They are very quick to realise if they get praised for something that does not deserve it. Promote activities that give success. This is particularly important if they're struggling with schoolwork. So give them encouragement to join in sports or drama or music or anything the school has got on. And even community activity. I once had a student with ASD and there was no way he was going to get involved with the other students in school. However, we arranged for him to do the shopping once a week for an elderly neighbour. There was social interaction and he developed a feeling of competency and he knew he was trusted. Let them know everybody makes mistakes and is part of the learning experience. Show them the progress they make over time. Encourage them to ask for help if they're having difficulty. There's a link here to the Department of Education Asking for Help form, which gives them ideas about how they could go about asking teachers for help. There may be 2 difficulties that cause interviews and presentations to be challenging and stressful. One is they might need more time to process the questions being asked, and the second is they may need time to retrieve the words they need to answer questions. I would encourage them to prepare, and then prepare more. They need more time and practice than other people. Make the presentation out in key points to help them speak fluently and keep to the topic. Brainstorm possible questions they could be asked and prepare answers to those in point form. Prepare prompt cards that could be referred to if really needed. One technique used by politicians is to ask for the question to be repeated, and this can give more time to think about it. Role play. Do practice interviews. Practice the timing for the interview. Practice walking in confidently with your shoulders back, keeping eye contact. If this is very difficult, get them to look at the forehead of the person they're speaking to. They appear to be making eye contact. Sitting close to the table so they can see less of you. The Dyslexia Association of Ireland has huge resources on their various websites. One is dyslexia.ie and also the dyslexiahub.ie. And then on YouTube, they have put up their webinars, and I give the link. And the webinars include 6 study skills webinars, the transition to secondary school, and assistive technology webinars. They also have a workshop they call Dyslexia and Me, and it's a regional workshop for students in senior primary or junior cert, and it's on self-esteem and resilience, and it's a much fun. The dates will be on the dyslexia.ie website. Just to mention 2 further resources. One is the DAI Information Hub, which has a section on emotional well-being, and the British Dyslexia Association have a knee learning module on motivation and self-esteem as well. I hope you have found this webinar useful and it has given you some useful strategies.